right, well, it worked.
Yeah, there it goes.
There we go. We're officially on the right official account. Who knows what happened? Okay, and then I guess we're still waiting for Eric to rejoin too.
Oh, here he comes.
All right, well, a few minutes delay there, but we are all here. Should we go ahead and call to order?
Yes.
35?
Yes.
All right, and we'll do a roll call. I'm here, Kirsten Compitello.
Val Chef's here.
Rich Kramer's here.
Herring's here.
And John Oliveria is here.
All right, and we have one other person on the line, Jason Daly.
Oh, hi there. I'm Jason Daly. I'm working with the borough right now, and I've just been attending a bunch of the committee meetings. So I appreciate the ability for me to attend this meeting. So thank you.
What do you work for the borough on?
I'm really sitting in on all of the different committee meetings and working with the administration on how the administration works with the various committees and how the work comes out of those committees gets reassigned, and really how to make everything more efficient for them right now.
Oh, you're a consultant. Gotcha.
I am. Yes. Yep.
Thank
Yep.
you.
All right,
Sure.
welcome.
Welcome,
Thank you.
yeah. Nice to have you here.
Well, our next item on the agenda is to go to citizen comments. For those who are on the line. We have John. Did you have any comments you wanted to share?
No, I don't.
All right. So we'll go on to the Parks Master Site Plan update. Really only a couple of things on our agenda for today. But the Parks Master Site Plan, and Eric, you can chime in on this one too. This has been ongoing and is starting to get towards the end of the process. We were supposed to have a steering committee meeting this week, and it was rescheduled because there were a lot of conflicts. So we'll probably be having another steering committee next week to go over the draft and see what the latest and final plans are that are coming out of that, as well as hear what kind of the top priorities are to go forward for deciding which project kind of rises to the top to go after a grant this year. I know that there has been some feedback in the past month from the Crafton Performing Arts group, as well as a couple of other stakeholders in the community. So there was an additional outreach session. The consultant met with some of those stakeholders and looked over specific plans for the area around the community garden, the band shell in the area that would impact Crafton Performing Arts. And I wasn't in that conversation, but I heard that it went well. Greg, who's one of our steering committee members, did a really great job moving that conversation forward and kind of getting this one-on-one sit down with a couple of those extra stakeholders. So I know there were some concerns about the band shell after that last round of plans that were put together for public engagement. But it sounds like those have been resolved, and it sounds like everyone's on board. And I'm assuming we'll hear more about that when we have our steering committee meeting. But that's really the only update I have, is that it sounds like they did a little bit more refined drawing and a little bit more like one-on-one conversations with a couple of those stakeholders, and have come to a consensus and come to a plan that is going to be final. Other things we talked about at the last steering committee that I know we are planning to touch on further at this next steering committee meeting are starting to really identify which projects are the biggest priorities or the most likely to pursue for a grant cycle in the next year. That grant with DCNR will be due in April, and Gateway is going to start working on the grant application throughout March. So we have it all lined up and ready to go. And it sounded like there were some trail projects that rated very highly, but trail projects will probably not be that grant because there's separate funding for them. The grant cycle through DCNR in April is more specifically for park improvements. And so the major park improvements are to think about what we've been suggesting for Crafton Park, what we've been talking about for Linwood Park and Noble Park, and then what we've been talking about down at the Public Works site.
Mommy, do we still have those balls?
Can you wait? I'm in a meeting, bud. I don't have solid answers on those, so I'm just giving updates on what we talked about last time. I know our next steering committee will get towards more answers on this. So Eric, feel free to join in if there's anything I missed too, because I was on Zoom for that last meeting and I didn't quite hear it all. But the Public Works site I know is not likely to be what we'll put in for this year because there's so much else going on with it and construction ongoing that park improvements down there will probably happen in a following year. So that really leaves us with deciding between the improvements that have been suggested for Crafton, Linwood, and Noble, deciding which one of those will be the 2022 grant.
Yeah, the consultant is being very cautious about what goes into our plan as opposed to, you know, what is doable. So properties that are not in a direct possession of the borough are just, you know, they shouldn't be in the plan. There might be a reference kind of as a, if we should get hold of this kind of a thing. But as far as the core plan goes, so anything along the creek that has to do with the Corps of Engineers, well, it's their property, not ours, right? Anything that has to do with, you know, the public works, well, there's a big thing that has to happen there kind of first. So it's an order of operations problem, right? So once that's kind of, you know, back, the scope of work there is substantial, right? It's bigger than what a grant would be in this cycle that we could afford, that we could go after anyway. So it kind of, you know, by default narrows it into a couple of key areas. A lot of time was spent on the budget. You know, I kind of wanted to make sure that the final plan, in my opinion, should be representationally balanced a little bit between the parklets. You know, to have one at $500,000 and one at $500,000 and one at like 1.8 million kind of looks weird, even though it's, you know, for a completely different reason. It looks, the optics of it was a little bit weird. So there was a lot of fine tuning around that. And I think the ultimate plan that comes out is going to be, you know, really something to build on. But I think as far as, you know, there's the plan, which will last and be durable. Then there's the grant cycle that is, well, we got to hurry up and get something to John and company because it's got to be approved right away, right? So, so there's kind of like the, you know, these two, they're not competing, but they are very much, very much in parallel and conjoined, right? So that's kind of what's at a critical road right now. And then ultimately the timeline to get all that to John and company to approve means that we got to work super fast. So the fact that we had to reschedule last night's meeting is kind of a blow, but we'll recover. We'll get it to the powers that be on time.
Yeah, and I actually, we had a number of steering committee members who couldn't make it. And the consultant had asked if I thought that we should reschedule. And my initial concern was the same as yours, Eric. I don't know if that's going to cost us time that we don't have, but we had a conversation about it and he said that we're really doing fine on time. So that eased my concerns. And Gateway is already working on kind of the structure of the grant application. They've been part of this process all along. And they've already been in contact with DCNR. And apparently DCNR has been also following along our process as we've been doing it. And they've indicated that we can go ahead and submit for the grant if the plan is still in draft mode. We had initially thought it had to be not just finalized, but also formally adopted by council before the April grant was due. And apparently that's not the case. So I think we still want to try to keep on target and keep on track, but the pressure is off a little bit. We don't actually, our schedule is fine, and DCNR is fine with even the draft that we currently have.
Right. I don't know if it's worth appending to this. I didn't hear back, and we'll talk to AJ at the next meeting, but AJ's the consultant, sorry. The thing that I, in a conversation, the thing that I sent out in that email when things went sideways with the rescheduling and everything. There's a DCED grant that's due May 31st that we're not talking about. And maybe, I don't know if that's something to interject to Planning Commission, because it's only a 15-point match, right? So 15 grand gets us 100. You know, if it's not part of the park plan per se, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Is that something that we want to tackle? Is that something we want to make a recommendation around? Is there something that's, Planning Commission-esque, maybe aligned to, but maybe not in? What would be the part, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's in our, I don't know if that's a toy in this pool, but it seems
you
like
know what
something
it's
we might
for?
want to talk about.
Do you know what it's called or what it's for? Eric?
Yeah, I got the name. It's called GTRP, and that stands for Greenways, Trails, and Recreation Program. That sounds pretty broad.
Is that the trails one that Kirsten mentioned being?
Don't think so, because the other one we were talking about, and I don't know this, but the other one we were talking about was a 50% match, and this is 15. Like, I'm kind of a price conscious shopper sometimes, and that sounds like a good deal.
It is part of what I was talking about, that the trails for the DCNR grant, which is what our contract with BPD to do this Parks Master Site Plan update was all oriented towards, positioning us to go after a DCNR Parks grant. And we got the funding to do that Parks Master Site Plan study in the first place through DCNR. They funded the study so that we could come up with a recommendation for a project for them to then fund. That is not best used for trails, but as part of the planning process, we have been talking about trail projects and trail improvement projects. And so we have been talking about how there are other grants out there now that we have this Parks Master Site Plan report. There are other grants out there that we can go after for trail projects. So we don't have to choose between the park project or a trail project. We can do both because they have separate pots of money. And this GTRP grant is one of those other.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
That makes a lot more sense. All right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I know
But this is a great one to know about. And I know that you mentioned it, you sent it to the steering committee and to AJ, and I'm sure he already knew about that. When I talked to him on the phone about whether the reschedule would slow us down or not, he mentioned that he'd seen that and it was already in their list.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't had our steering committee meeting yet, but I think that'll come up at the next time. And I don't know if we're quite positioned yet as a planning commission to see how we'd like to spend that, but or if we'd like to pursue it. But I think if the parks project doesn't end up recommending that with the steering committee, then maybe that's something that we consider for our next month's meeting.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't mean to, let's face it, I never mean to convolute, but if, by default, I am who I am. I just think that's it's something for us to kind of keep in mind. It's like, wow, if we could make it, if the park goes a different way, and they're doing something else, maybe, maybe this is something that we should, do a little homework around it. So do you guys know, so GTRP, that couldn't cover the eco district thing, right? Because that's 10 grand.
Where did you see 10 grand?
I thought it was
You
10
have-
grand for the join the eco district consortia thing.
You mean just to, yeah, that would be just to sign up.
Right.
I don't think we would do that on its own. We would want a planning study to start the work for us, right?
You're going down the paths. I couldn't say it all, but you're smarter. So like, could this somehow like be fodder to, I don't know what's the net sum for eco districting, it's 10 grand plus a lot more, I'm sure. But could GTRP be leveraged where instead of we're paying the eco district on our own, could we leverage GTRP to pave the way for eco districting, or however you say it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's something to look into. I'm not sure how likely that is, but
I don't even know who to ask.
something to look into. Actually, so as part of the local government academy courses for new council members, I've been attending over the past few weeks. There was a session about climate adaptation and sustainability, and I asked a question that resulted in some follow-up emailing about funding sources from Sustainable Pittsburgh. So I've been meaning to get back to them, specifically to ask about funding sources for eco district planning. So I will put that I will mention this in that email as well.
So now that I still have 20 minutes from you guys all, is there anything else? Because eco districting's kind of been something we've been talking about, so it was on my mind. But is there anything else that we as planning commission want to kind of, before next meeting, before next month, is there something that we want to, kind of noodle on that could be you saw where I went right away. I'm like, God, it's such low hanging fruit. Can we just get the dog run in? Because everybody in Crafton's going to throw like a New Year's Eve party. It'll be huge to get a dog run in, so, but is there anything else that we've been kind of thinking about from the planning commission perspective? Is there something else that is Greenway Trail and rec program? Seems like it's pretty good to have the rec team on this one as well, but I don't know. Is there anything else anyone has any ideas around? Ideation, folks. Any ideas?
Just in terms of trails, the 3 that have come up through this project, and one of them only unofficially, 3 trails that have been talked about are the trolley trail, obviously, is one of the properties included in the park's master site plan. And that's something that we could use funds like this for. That's a trail that we already own. The plans are what came out of the planning process is fairly, ready to go. That's relatively shovel ready. I mean, it's not engineered yet, but it's ready to go into the next phase. That could be a good candidate, and it's that funding would get us pretty far on that. The next one is the Creek Trail, which is more challenging because we don't own it all. But we could do a phase of it, or we could see if a grant like this would let us go after the study, which is the recommendation in the plan, that since we don't own the property, our next step is to pursue a study to look at acquiring the property or partnering with whoever does own it, or getting the county or some other entity to purchase it and partner with us, et cetera. And then the third is the busway trail, which is not a property that was covered in the park's master site plan, but has been discussed lightly. And it is a borough-owned property. It's an old paper street that is along the busway from Crafton Boulevard down to Woodlawn.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, guys, just it like once a year, cut it. I mean, it's
I'm pretty sure they cut it once a year, maybe only once a
Yeah.
Well, last year, the particular mower, the reticulating mower or whatever it was out for repairs, so they never actually did it. So I was like, just drive a freaking truck down it. I mean, that would be better than nothing. But anyway,
Mhm.
But that's only the trails. And the other things included in here are greenways and recreation. So, I mean, some of the other things we've talked about are, you know, things like bike routes or more open streets events. I don't know what else the recreation committee may have talked about.
yeah, I don't have any care what the content is, but I think 15 cents on a dollar. We had darn well be at least one, if not couple, applications in. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a,
Mhm.
you know, that buys a lot of crushed stone on the trolley trail, if nothing else. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think a good next step for that would be to, I mean, obviously, it's been shared with the consultant doing the parks plan.
Yep.
So I think we'll discuss that at our next steering committee. Share this with the Parks and Rec Committee. And get them thinking about it to see if there's, you know, ideas that they've had that we might want to apply this to. And then, you know, this group can think about other things that we might see this being useful for. And then maybe have more of a conversation about it at our next meeting, because we are going to need to make sure that council and our budget committee are willing to commit 15% of a budget of some sort for a project next year. So we need to get a sense of how much we could put in for, and ideas from, you know, figure out whether the park master site plan is planning to use this, whether the Parks and Rec Committee has ideas for it, and then we can see what we all decide. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Is there anything actionable that I can do to help with this? I mean, I'm pretty, you guys are the in crowd. No one likes me.
Do you want to look into the requirements or look into what it covers?
Yeah,
Types of projects qualify, and maybe do a summarized list that we could then also share with the Parks and Rec Committee? Because that's the information they'll need to know too. It may be called greenways, trails, and recreation, but I'm sure it's not a free for all, anything you can possibly think of. I'm sure there's some kind of guideline.
sounds good.
Yes.
Otherwise, in terms of the recommendations from the Parks Master Site Plan, that will be selecting and prioritizing one project to pursue grant funding for next year. The three big parks that were being talked about were, again, Crafton, Linwood, and Noble. And as of the last steering committee meeting, the discussion was focusing more on Linwood and Noble and picking one of those two, or picking some subset of improvements within the set of improvements for either of those. And the reasoning for that was that we've made a lot of improvements in Crafton Park over the years, including a $500,000 in improvements going in this year. And so we wanted to make sure that we get those other two parks, you know, pick one of them to get up to snuff, and address some of the basic needs that aren't being met right now, like safety or accessibility. So that seemed to be the way that we're headed, that it's likely to be, because trail funding will go through a separate grant process, because Crafton Park is already getting the $250,000 investment in the pool this year. That grant funding that we put in for will likely be either Linwood or Noble. But that's a conversation to open up to the Planning Commission if there are thoughts or feedback to take back to the steering committee, because those recommendations are still being finalized.
Great.
Or does that just make sense to everyone else on the Planning Commission? I know we have a small commission right now. couple of vacant seats.
Tiny people.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think that all sounds good.
Eric and I are already on the steering committee, so I really wanted to make sure that Lydia and Rich, if you guys have thoughts, questions on it, or thoughts about what the recommendation should be out of that we can take back to the steering committee. Wanted to make sure that you have a chance to share those.
No, I don't have anything else to add. I think we're just going in the right direction.
Mhm. Yeah, and just so it's not lost, I know the idea of a dog park has come up as well. And I don't know what the current thought on that is, so I'm sure we'll discuss that at the next steering committee meeting as well, but it's been discussed repeatedly that that's something that we can do without grant funding. So I don't think it's an either or. I don't think it's we choose another park project and we don't do a dog park. I think it's that we're looking for ways to do both. Because the dog park is not something that we need the grant funding for.
And in my opinion, if we don't go after the GTRP and we can use it, because it seems like we can use it for a dog park, then we should at least, you know what I mean? If we should at least go after this for that, because that's basically 85 cents on a dollar of what we would spend anyway. You know, I mean,
Correct.
Because the dog park is basically just a fence
it is just a fence. That's
around
right.
an area.
But fences are very expensive, and if you're in any way connected to building materials these days, they are astronomically more expensive than they should be. So, you know, and I said I'm the first one to volunteer if you want me to. I'll walk down the hill and cut down the fence, and we can roll it up and reuse the fence that's there and just reconfigure it, because that's fine. You know, it's totally fine, totally doable, good fence, nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
But we just need a decision.
The committee
So,
talked a lot about using the ball field at Crafton Park that is not in use really for anything anymore and often floods, and repurposing that area for a dog park.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
might be the historical perspective. Go ahead, John, sorry.
I was gonna say, from a dog park, there is maintenance, of course, that has to happen. So Public Works would need to be in there. Also insurance, because if somebody would happen to get bit or somebody's dog starts fighting. So there are, with other dogs and kills a dog potentially, you know, there's other issues that come with that also. So we have to.
And there's a shit ton of administrative overhead that could be associated with it too. Green Tree has the whole key fob entry system. And I think that, I don't just mean to snub ourselves at Thornburg, but I get a little bit high and tight around Thornburg's treatment of Craftonites, and our ability to use the old Crafton golf course to walk my dog. You know, the fact that I have to give them a pint of blood every year is,
Yes.
I don't know. It's just silly. It's just silly. We police your streets. You know what I mean? We give you the
Right.
same price that I paid to go to my pool. So, you know, like I said, I don't mean to, you know, be too, but again, I think that the key fob system would be a good thing, for us, knowing the, you know, the troubles that you have. And I think that making it a Crafton dog run would be fine. But again, that is significant, not insignificant anyway, administrative overhead, to put those key fobs and all that sort of stuff in place. In addition to insurance and liability, in addition to maintenance and all of the things in terms, it's not just about putting up a fence and, hey, we got a dog run. So there's a lot of costs that are behind this or underneath the surface.
That's
Good.
where understanding what the grant could cover would be helpful. And I'm sure, I know that's already happening as part of the parks plan, but we can certainly start understanding that on our own. I would assume a grant like that could definitely cover the fence, would potentially be able to cover something like a security system or, you know, key fob entry, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's highly unlikely it would cover any kind of administrative overhead, maintenance, ongoing maintenance or
But
insurance.
the administrative burden to effectively hire someone, because the borough offices, I mean, they got a jam-packed day the way it is, to hire somebody to do all of that stuff, that would get the key fob entry and the, all that sort of, figure out the right insurance and meet with the brokers. And there's got to be a consultant that can be hired out of a grant, in my opinion. And I live off of grants, but there's got to be a way to write the grant in a way that would get us those things. So we'd have the ongoing maintenance, but the grant would cover the deployment thereof. So that we have a secure facility, a key fob process, a plan for what the insurance is going to be, all delivered in a packet with a bow on it from somebody that was hired under the grant. Plug and play.
To look into see whether that's something that could qualify.
Well, I'm halfway through the email to Fontana's office to force him to do his job and tell me.
Do we want any other questions or conversation about the parks planning process and the status of that, or do we want to go on to the zoning? The zoning project RFP. Council voted to repost the zoning RFP. So that has now been advertised. It's went out a few weeks ago, went out right after that last council meeting. That RFP will be open for bids through March 15th. It's been posted on the borough website. It was sent out to each of the firms that applied in the 2019 round. And it was also posted on the website for the Pennsylvania Planning Association, which is where it was posted also in 2019. So that'll be open until March 15th. And then at our next Planning Commission meeting, which will also be our joint meeting with Ingram, we will have responses at that point, and so we can review those. We also will need to put together an interview committee, which will include Crafton and Ingram. So typically, and this is what we did before as well, the interview committee is not an open meeting. That's not something that involves a quorum of any sort. So the representatives there could be myself and Lydia and Coletta, which retains Lydia and Coletta from the previous process. And then also includes Greg and any other representative they would like to appoint from Ingram. Does that work for the Planning Commission?
Yes.
Fine with me.
Sorry. Is there a rubric?
Is there a rubric?
Yeah.
Not yet.
I mean, like I said, I'm at $4.8 million in grants so far this year, and I tie everything back to a rubric. Because people spit at it. You know what I mean? People get, they have their own ideas. So just making it a score sheet says, look, 37 to 14. Here's the points. You know what I mean? I'm a big fan of it. It's science. It's indisputable. Everybody agrees. There's no gut feeling. If there's gut feeling, we can put it into the rubric. You know what I mean? On a scale of 1 to 10, were you comfortable working with this consultant? 3. Well, no, right? So again, I would think that without a rubric, it's just open to, just like last go around, more dart throwing. This is not hard work. There are several consultants that can do it. Let's pick one and move on, and let's make sure it doesn't become politicized, is all I'm saying.
I have thought about preparing a rubric. I just haven't put it together yet. Wanted to make sure that we had the interview committee, that everyone agreed, or if there were other thoughts about who wanted to be on the committee, that we had a chance to discuss that first. Those interviews wouldn't happen until after March 15th at the very earliest. But yeah, we'll put together some kind of rubric. I know there was a scoring system used previously too. I don't know how rigorously it was used. And I don't think it needs to be rigorously used, but we have a set of, within the RFP, we have a set of things that we're asking for, and we'll want to be able to have a way to rank them, rank each applicant on how well they've addressed each of the items that we have been requesting, as well as obviously rank them on how they come in terms of budget and timeline and experience and presentation. Also with the previous process, there was the Planning Commission had a chance to review and give a recommendation, which was in advance of the interview committee. Is that right, Lydia? That's my recollection of it. The Planning Commission reviewed first and then the interview committee.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check back at the timeline.
That's what I recall, that the Planning Commission reviewed all 4 applicants, selected 2 top contenders, made a recommendation to proceed to interview. Did the interview committee interview all 4 firms, or did they interview those
All
top
4.
2? Interviewed all
The
4.
interview committee interviewed all 4. I
Mhm.
believe we ranked them, kind of making it clear that we preferred OHM. And then went back to, my recollection is that we went back, then had the interviews or had the presentations to council of those top 2 firms. And I don't know if that presentation to council, I believe that presentation to council was after Planning Commission had already reviewed the proposals and provided our recommendation.
We probably debated it twice, but I know the Planning Commission did review all 4 first in advance of the interviews, because I remember that we all had discussion about questions that we wanted to ask that we then gave to the interview committee to ask during the
Mhm.
interview. The Planning Commission did talk about what questions we wanted to ask. So that happened
Yeah,
first.
I think the proposals themselves were made available early to Planning Commission, but I don't think we made a decision about our preference until after the interviews had taken place.
That may be.
Yeah, I think we must have discussed it. Multiple meetings were spent on that
Mhm.
for sure. And then even after the council presentations, Eric, I think you came to a Planning Commission meeting. And we discussed it again, and the idea of a rubric was part of that meeting.
Yeah. I did. I brought it up pretty hardly. I can't stand the contentiousness. I mean, how do we politicize everything? It's a zoning report or whatever.
Is there a way to make sure we have the Planning Commission joint meeting can review the proposed rubric before it's used?
We
Hold off
can.
on scheduling
Yes.
interviews until,
Aren't we, wait a minute.
So our next Crafton Planning Commission meeting, our Crafton Ingram Planning Commission meeting will be the 22nd of March.
Yeah.
So that is 1 week after
Yeah.
the
bids.
materials will all be due.
Mhm.
They're due at 4 o'clock on the 15th. So that means they could be distributed to Planning Commission members in both boroughs on the 16th to review in advance of a joint meeting on the 22nd.
Can I,
If we spend the joint meeting discussing some of the questions we think the rubric should include. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, I mean, this seems, I'm no expert, right? I mean, I'm not an expert. There's very few things I'm an expert in. You want to talk about equity and school reform, maybe, but nothing else. So why wouldn't we go, aren't we using the template that was created by state agency X, Y, and Z specifically for these things? Don't they have a companion rubric? I mean, seriously, what are we paying politicians for if they haven't done this stuff, right? I mean, don't they have this already? If we use their template for the RFP, which RJ said we did, you know what I mean? Isn't there a companion rubric that we can then, tweak to, Kirsten, you're way smarter about this stuff, like what is the stuff that's like, that's really not relevant to us. We can throw that away. But, don't they have a rubric that we can just like template and, you can customize or configure to make our own?
It shouldn't be hard to come up with one. I mean, it will be based right on the items that are in the RFP.
Right.
And I can certainly put together a draft of that before the 22nd. I think it is a good idea to let the two planning commissions discuss, additions or tweaks to it.
Sure.
But are we using an existing template? Probably not. The RFP template was developed by Connect, and I'm not aware that there's a rubric that they
okay.
developed with it.
I thought it came from a state agency. See,
No,
all I get is I piece stuff together out of sugar packets. You know what I mean?
Eric,
So
zoning
sources of
projects are
truth
not-
for me are Brad Krause. I mean, seriously, give me a break.
Zoning projects are not templates, and each community is different, and the needs of each are different.
Yeah.
I mean, they are not template. They are not copy paste, and
But here's the thing, Kirsten, like you got a life, you got 25 irons in the fire. Putting all this on your back to develop a rubric because you're the smartest person in the room. I love the idea, but I feel terrible about it.
You're such a talker, Eric. I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I had already had it on my agenda to make a rubric.
Okay.
And I intend to build it based around the requirements in the RFP and just have a rating system that allows us to keep track of how well each firm is addressing the items that we were asking for. As well as some of the, the things that go with it, which include budget and the timeline and the availability of the consultant to us, are they local or not, their experience and the experience of the staff that they have on the project. Those are all very standard items. So that's not something that they can't handle.
Okay. I'll let you. I just worry about you.
I'm letting you take on that grant that you found, Eric. Go get us
No
a
problem.
$250,000.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So if that timeline works for everyone, we will be getting applications back on the 15th. They'll be distributed shortly afterwards. The 16th, I'll check with Doug and see how quickly he thinks they can be distributed, but I don't see why they couldn't be posted for both borough planning commissions as soon as the 16th. And then we'll have the chance to review them on our own time in advance of that 22nd joint meeting. We can talk then about questions that any members want to make sure are asked. This will all be passed over to the interview committee. We can also make sure that we're having a chance to discuss the rubric and discuss how we want to prioritize and rank the interviewees. And then we'll probably be looking at setting up interviews that following week. I know we all want to move quickly on this and we know what we want. We've been looking for it for a long time. So after the planning commissions have met, we can go ahead and start thinking about dates that we are available to make available for interviews. Do we want to talk about how many firms we would like to interview? We have no idea yet how many are going to apply. I know in 2019, we interviewed all 4 that applied, which is more than we need to. And, we could have 2 apply this time. We could have 8 apply this time. I don't think we want to commit to interviewing every firm that applies. We probably want to pick the top 2 to 3.
Again, in my world, the pick the top 2 or 3 by scoring as it is, right? 75% on content, score each section as 10 points, 25 points for pricing. And then, everybody else is thrown out, right? And then the interview is worth 25 points to the winner, right? Simple, effective, and equitable, right? You know what I mean? It's such a, Kirsten, when you get to that far in a rubric, you have all the stuff done. I can come up with the mathematical kind of, win, lose, or draw format so that, yeah, because you shouldn't be inquiring and interviewing 8 people. You should be having 2, 3 maybe, right?
Eric,
And you
this-
use the score sheet to say who gets in.
with this rubric, it's almost in 2 parts. You have a rubric to score the proposal, and then there's a section left blank until after an interview. If those companies meet a threshold to be interviewed, then you have a secondary section for a rubric associated with the interview.
Yeah, effectively, yes, right? Your interview is 25 points. Whoever hits these topics best and explains it the best, and it can be the same things. Again, it can be the same things that are requirements of the bid, right? Be the same things that are requirements of the bid, but then they're addressing them in the interview, right? So walk us through your proposal. Here are the 6, salient pieces to it. Go through it, and each one's worth 10 points, and the committee scores, as the interview goes on. And so you have the score sheet from somebody who's good at writing, then you have a score sheet from somebody who's good at talking, and then you have a winner. Simple. You get what you want. No drama.
I think there's always a room for a discussion too, to understand whether we're really getting what it is that we want, what it is that's the right fit for us. So I think there's still going to be room for the committees, for both planning commissions, to discuss what they're looking for. But the rubric will definitely help us narrow that down and keep it on target and moving quickly. I would suggest that on that March 22nd joint meeting, we start with using an initial rubric to narrow down who the top contenders are.
Yep.
Have some discussion as needed to make sure that hopefully we all can come to a relatively easy agreement on who some of the top contenders are. We want 2 to 3 firms that we proceed to interviews with. That would be my suggestion, that we maybe aim for 2, but allow for 3 if there's very close competition.
Sure.
And then we would also want to enable more discussion of the rubric, which would be used to narrow down those last 2 and 3, which would be used for the interview. We want feedback from both planning commissions on what should be added or adjusted in the rubric as we go into the interviews. Is that a process that works? Right, that goes to that 2-phased step. We first decide who our top contenders are to go to interview.
Mhm.
And then secondly, at that joint meeting, we all have a chance to tailor and tweak the rubric that'll be used during the interviews.
Yeah, can we just, I'm sure the rubric will be fine, but can we just take a moment at the start of the meeting next
Sure.
month to review the initial rubric that we're about to use to refine, and just make sure everybody agrees with what we're.
Yeah,
having
we can start with
together.
that. I mean, Eric, you're a big fan of the rubrics, but I don't think it's a mathematical decision. I think the mathematical application of those will help us narrow down, but we can still
No.
discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And people often mistake when I say mathematical for something else. It is not a quantitative decision, right? To me, qualitative decision-making still falls in the domain of mathematics, but that's my world. It is very much, I would say, more heavily rated on the qualitative matter than it is on the quantitative. Do you hit the requirements to do the job? Have you done a job? Do you have user experience? Like, that's all quantitative. The qualitative is how easy are they to work with? How flexible are they to, what kinds of projects are not dissimilar for ours? Those are all qualitative factors that don't fit so easily into the normal, 2 points, 3 points, 5 points kind of dilemma. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
yeah, I think we're on board then. Do we want to go ahead and just talk through what we think should be on that rubric? I mean, I've listed a couple of things that I intend to formalize into that, but there will be, categories that correspond to each task in the RFP where we can quantify whether they've met and how well they've met each of the items that we asked for, right, per task.
If you want the tasks, I'm by no means qualified to have an opinion.
I don't know if, I wasn't thinking we need to list them all out, but
Oh,
I mean, in these minutes, we can go back to the RFP if we want, but that RFP has been circulating for a few years now. So
right. So.
I think we would just take the language right from that and have a series of boxes for each task in that RFP. Did they
Bingo.
meet it?
Yep.
They meet it all the way, part way, not very well, not at all.
Yep.
Have a series of points allocated per each task on how well they met the items that we're asking for.
Yep.
Then there would also be rubrics for how experienced they are, what the cost is, what the number of hours are that they're anticipating spending, availability of the team, overall presentation. Level of it, well, we already mentioned experienced.
Yep.
Possibly size of the team. That kind of goes with availability of the team, but are they
Mhm.
local? Is there a sizable team? Can we expect that they'll be very responsive? Is it only one or two people that might be hard to get a hold of? I think those are all questions that we will consider. These are all questions that we considered last time as well. Timeline. Those are just things on the top of my head. So are there other items that any of you can think of you'd like to add?
So would numbers of hours and timeline be related?
Mm,
Not exactly. Timeline would be whether they think that this is a 6-month project or a 12-month project or an 18-month project. Number of hours is more, are they planning to do this? Are they charging us $100,000 and they're spending 100 hours on it? Or are they spending 500 hours on it?
Mhm.
More goes to how much effort they're putting in versus what their rate is.
Would we know that from the bid? They don't often publish their rates. You can't necessarily back out the number of hours they're planning.
Yep.
It's typical for them to indicate the number of hours per task. It's even typical to indicate the hourly rate for all personnel that are on the project. And I don't recall if we asked this in this RFP, since we just really reused the version from a few years ago. I don't recall offhand if that was specified that we wanted that. But regardless, it's not uncommon to include. It doesn't have to be a disqualifying item if they don't all provide it, but it's worth considering if we do have that information.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon to ask for at least a blended rate, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Are there other, anything else that anyone can think of? We can also continue thinking about this. If anyone has thoughts or additions that they'd like to see added, feel free to just email me those. We have a few more weeks until these
Okay.
Applications all come in. So there's still some time to put together that initial rubric and add questions and considerations to it. Do we want to? Well, are there any other discussion items or questions or comments about the zoning process? I think-
I
Go ahead.
Yeah, Kirsten, I just wanted to mention that, obviously the last step is around the council and proposing everything to council. And one of the things that I noticed just in the RFP side was that there was a decision from the commission, but then there was a contrary decision that was made to each council member individually prior to the meeting that was very confusing. So I want to say that whatever comes out, whatever decision, whether everyone agrees with it or not, it comes out of the commission, that needs to be what's presented and not contra or personal information or personal preference in terms of whether it's a company selected or not selected. It has to be one voice that's coming out versus people going individually to council members to express different views than what the commission is proposing.
John,
So
are you referring to my email?
yes.
To be fair, John, we did not have a decision on that. We had a split decision in December.
Okay,
So
but
we did not have a unified decision. We ended up not making a vote or a motion.
We had
The part-
previously had a unified decision that EPD should be selected 2 times. So that was a very special case, and I don't think I was out of line by expressing my opinion. I feel very offended that you're even suggesting that I shouldn't have emailed. That took a lot of thought, a lot of emotional energy from me. And now I feel like not only did you not appreciate it, take the recommendation, but now you're actually calling me out in public for doing something I believed in. That's ridiculous.
I am
It's so
telling
unfair.
you, well, I'm saying what it was viewed from a new council's perspective. So
I
I
tried
am
to
giving you,
present very fair information. I don't think I was out of line at all.
I didn't say it was out of line. What I said it was the council was confused by the mixed messages. So please don't take my words differently. The council all received an email individually, did not know that it was sent individually to each person. And I'm expressing exactly what happened. And
I
then
sent it to everybody individually so that they would feel comfortable replying without having the potential reply all and having their response go to everybody. It was email etiquette. I wasn't trying to hide that I was sending it to everybody. I was perfectly honest about that.
Well, nobody knew that it was sent to everybody. So that was I am telling you what the perspective was. So this is what the perspective was. It was then presented in a different light at the council meeting than was what was on the email. So if there was conflict or if there was something different, that's what's going to cause differences to happen at the council meeting. So I'm giving the advice right now of how we would want to present this for going forward to council. And
I think, John, I think that what you're describing now is completely irrelevant going forward as to looking backward. Lydia lived through a couple of years of everyone singing from the same choir sheet, and yet we can't seem to get to the sermon. I mean, 2 years of it, right? And I think she conveyed those opinions and those thoughts in a way that was both charismatic, eloquent, and quite frankly, factual. There was nothing in there that was opinionated other than the fact that opinions had been levied multiple times over the past 2 years, including those in unison from the Planning Commission. But going forward, what we're talking about here is to prevent things like this. At the end of the day, we all just want to get this done. At the end of the day, we're on the same team. At the end of the day, this is just hiring a consultant to do a little job. I mean, I understand it's a big deal and it faces, the future of the community, all those sorts. I get what's on the line. Thanks to Lydia, thanks to Kirsten, and a couple others that have educated me on this. Coletta, people like this that have helped me understand this because I didn't think it was a thing, but it seems like a pretty big thing. And now I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. But we are all here giving up our time to support our council, which you are president of, and we are not going out of line in any way, shape, or form We are simply saying that we will make a recommendation, and that's all we are. We serve to recommend. That's it. You choose what you want to do with it, and you will get one recommendation out of this. Might be a split decision, but you'll get that recommendation and that report from us in our minutes.
And that is what I was asking for. So that was the point, because I am telling you, and again, regardless of what the intent was, the perspective of council and how they viewed it was different. So
Well, I
don't,
do.
please
hope
do
that
not
you-
think of the intent.
I
I
do
am
hope that
telling
you can help council understand that there was no misinformation that was meant to be spread. It was simply Lydia had a really great experience in putting this together and wanted to make sure that it didn't fall short on the fact that time is of the essence and getting this done was her priority. I hope that you can explain that to council to eliminate the confusion that seems to have settled in.
Right. And it's done now. What I'm giving is the perspective. And so that when we go forward, we need to have a voice that presents one decision from the planning commission going forward. And that's will be the most effective way to get things communicated and, you know, information presented to council so that you get the approvals. And council is very supportive of this project. It's just, I'm telling you what happened at that meeting.
This was a lot to be happening just as our new council was taking over, and we had this discussion and this vote in our very first month.
Right.
Shortly after the reorganization meeting. I know some emails were sent to each council member and they were very informative. And I would say that was acknowledged in the council meeting, that those emails were, I stated as much. They were accurate, they were informative. There were also other considerations that led me to make the recommendation that I did as infrastructure chair, not as planning commission. The planning commission's recommendation to proceed as quickly as possible, which was with the vote that we made, was conveyed to council. The planning commission's, strong emotions and split feelings were also conveyed to council. And the email that was sent to all council members was acknowledged as accurate and true, and it was good background information for each of those council members to have in advance of hearing it verbally as well. I think it helped people to understand a bit more. And we did have a pretty robust debate during that meeting to try to decide what ultimately we were going to go forward with. It was not an easy debate because there was not an easy answer, but we did have Ingram representatives in the room as well at that council meeting, and they both indicated that they were supportive and on board.
I reject the premise that I'm not allowed to email and provide my opinion. I am part of the planning commission. Kirsten is part of the planning commission. She represents her opinion as a council member separately from the planning commission. If other people are allowed to wear multiple hats, I'm allowed to email. And I really don't like the message that you're sending. You're saying that council is not approachable, that I should not have emailed, and that the way I emailed wasn't good enough because I didn't CC all and make it very clear that I included everybody. Why should it matter? Couldn't I email each individual person? Even if I had only sent it to one person, it still is valid. I really do not like this. I do not like the message that I'm hearing from the council president right now. Somebody
Well,
that I haven't even met. You're jumping down my throat when we don't even know each other. And I had given you an opportunity to speak with me about my opinions about this project multiple weeks ago. You didn't take me up on it. You just said, oh, Kirsten's keeping me in the loop. Okay, you don't want to hear my opinion. So what am I going to do? I'm going to email everybody.
And I don't appreciate you taking words out of my mouth, because I absolutely did not say you could not email everybody. I did not say that I rejected anything that you said. So I don't appreciate that. I put Kirsten in charge of the infrastructure committee, which Planning Commission reports into, and she reports into council that information. So each commission has a committee they report into, and that's how the process goes. So for every initiative, we can't have every resident, every commission person giving different mixed messages to council members. And you certainly could email, you can do the things. What I was saying is that as the discussion goes in the committee, if everybody does not agree with what decision is made, they shouldn't just go and email every council member with what their thoughts are, because ultimately it's one decision that needs to come, and maybe it's multiple decisions so council can make a decision on it. And in this case, there was a couple decisions, there was controversy, not controversy, there was differing opinions, but one decision had to be proposed. We couldn't accept one RFP and go up for RFP. So a decision had to be made. And you did provide really good information for it, but I'm saying for council, it was a confusing message. So that's the perspective, and that's what I wanted to relay here. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it. I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but for council, it was a confusing message.
Sorry that council was confused. I tried to be as clear as possible. We had a split decision here. We didn't have one of our members. We're short with a vacancy. There was no unified decision. And previously we had a unified decision 2 times. I was trying to present all the information because council is all new. They don't know the whole story. I've been there from the beginning, and I think I provide a unique perspective that Kirsten doesn't have. She wasn't part of the interview committee before. Not to take anything away from her, she's doing a great job, but she had her own opinions about this too. And it's not fair that she gets to only be the one to have an opinion and to sway all the votes in council just because she's on it now.
That I can say that did not happen. So that absolutely didn't happen. You know, the council.
We're now down a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, this isn't productive. So I heard the slap on the wrist. I don't plan to interview or to email council again. Thank you.
Yeah, it's disappointing. John, I don't know that you intended that, but I sat here and listened to it, and I'm disappointed to hear what you said. It sounded like you only want to hear one thing from us, and that our citizenry doesn't matter. And I don't think that you meant that, but that's what you said. And it's easy to interpret it either way, but I think that it's pretty easy to interpret it that way. So I feel bad. I think we should move forward. I don't think, John, you're not a bad guy. You didn't mean to be, you know. This was I think this is taken out of context. We're now in a place where we can't get back from. So I think the only thing that we can do is move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, let's move forward. I do think that's not the message that was intended. And certainly the voices of everyone are still welcome and heard. And I am doing my best. I will tell all of you, I'm doing my best to be clear about how I communicate what is coming from the Planning Commission versus what is coming from me. Because as do we all, I also have opinions, and I did try to represent that, I think, accurately at the council meeting, and to say what council or what the Planning Commission had discussed, and then what I was recommending out of it, is including the fact that we had a split decision at our December meeting. But I do very much appreciate the thoughts and opinions of everyone on the Planning Commission. And I know that the ideas that were shared by Lydia, and I believe there was another email sent as well. I don't know who that was, but one person, I got one from Lydia. Someone else mentioned getting 2. So there may have been someone else who also emailed. But those were were helpful, they were informative. They did confuse some of our new council members, and that may have just been unfortunate timing that this really big item and decision was happening as one of our very first items of business, as people were still getting their feet wet, but that is, that's a part of how it goes. And all of the comments that were shared were paid attention to and listened to and weighed before we made a decision. So shall we move on to the review of January minutes? I hope everyone feels good about themselves and the work that you're doing.
Can I motion to approve January minutes, please?
All right, I will second that. One item that we discussed at our January meeting, Rich, you were not able to attend, but I wanted to just circle back to it. Rich, you've been our secretary for the past few years.
Great.
I know you've had a lot of conflicts lately. So at our last meeting, we talked about whether someone else would like to be secretary for this year. And Lydia has stepped up to be secretary. But obviously we were down you last month, and I think we are happy to reopen that discussion if you would like to.
No, I'm perfect. But as I was listening here, I've been looking at the next couple of months, and I won't be able to attend next month's meeting, and then the one after that again too, because of events that are happening at the arena. So I think it's a good decision to let Lydia continue as secretary.
Okay.
Hey, one thing that, and Rich, thank you for everything that you do, secretary and otherwise, and all the above. And you're a rock of the community. Way to go, pillar. So one thing that was on the minutes, I forget her name, the woman that came to the meeting.
Green.
There's no like double jeopardy here, right? Like, because she's helping us out and doing what she's doing. Did you talk to the solicitor about this?
Because we decided to open the RFP, it's not something that I followed up on yet. It's not something we'll need to follow up on until or unless they actually bid and we select them. So it's kind of a moot point to be,
Well,
it's rather hypothetical at this point.
knowing the voluminous, I said shit ton earlier, so I'll say it again. The amount of work that goes into crafting these responses, it's not an insignificant expense for these organizations. So as a favor to them, and I don't buy it, but if the work that they've done to help us disqualifies them from bidding on this, I think we should let them know. You know what I mean? Before.
The only reason I don't think that applies is because they have done nothing yet. They haven't done anything. They offered to do something, but
And I want to let them.
we haven't got to that yet. And so at this point, if they had engaged in something and then bid, we would be having a discussion with the solicitor, but they haven't done anything. And if they do bid, and if, let's say they bid and they're successful, and then they want to also volunteer something on the side, we can check that with the solicitor. There's no expectation that would be any kind of conflict. But we can certainly check it.
Again, I'm sick and tired of the politicization of all this stuff. And if they should pull their generous offer off the table until all of this is settled, I understand it. You know what I mean? I think that the solicitor, I think the big guy should hear about it and just let them weigh in. You know what I mean? Just so we don't have another one of these freaking dramatic comedy shows that everybody enjoys watching on YouTube about it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
What's the situation, Eric?
Yeah, go on. Kirsten, you're better. Go. I'll stop talking.
A couple of designers, planners, etc., planners/designers, a couple of people reached out to Doug back in December or November even. They're with kind of collective group of designers that offer pro bono services. They do like design brainstorm sessions. And they reached out to Doug to say that they would like to do one in Crafton. Doug referred them to me, and so I had a discussion with them. It was 2 people, both with different firms. But they were both talking about doing this through this kind of pro bono volunteer design collaborative group that they participate in separately outside of their firms. And I shared that information with the Planning Commission at our December meeting. Planning Commission asked that we have them to speak to the Planning Commission in January. So I extended that invite, and one of them attended our January meeting and gave a presentation about the kinds of things that they were thinking about and that the group does and the value in it, and some things that they gave a presentation about what they could do with some kind of community charrette, community workshop. It would be probably like a one-day weekend thing. That being the same day that we were talking about the zoning project, the conversation did start to go off into talking about zoning. And the presenter indicated that if the RFP were opened, their firm would certainly like to go after it. So we can expect that they might do that.
Okay,
But-
well, it's open because these are open to the public.
Mhm.
And we would let the public talk. We let the public talk during the meetings.
Mhm.
And it is a public RFP.
Mhm.
So unless anything was discussed around the RFP that would, well, no, it would be all public. So everything that was discussed in the meeting would be public information. So I think we're fine with
The
that.
question was if they were to do some kind of volunteer, event or planning within Crafton, would that disqualify them from going after the zoning RFP? Which I think would be a question we would want to follow up on if they were already engaged in doing that kind of thing, but they're not. So far,
Oh,
they've
okay.
offered it, but we haven't, and we've expressed that we are interested, but we have our hands full right now with this other process, and we are, nothing has occurred, nothing has been scheduled. We can certainly take them up on their offer, but I don't think we are at all likely to or interested in taking them up on that within the next few weeks before we make a decision on the zoning. So there's no conflict between something they're already involved in and them going after another project. If they do, the way that our RFP was posted, it was not posted with any kind of registration required. So we have no way of knowing who's pursuing it.
Like I said, I just,
Mhm.
nothing makes me more ticked off when I respond to something and find out after I won that I'm not allowed to. I mean, just the effort it goes into these things, it's a labor of love. But when you don't get the show to love, you get pretty mad because you wasted your time. I don't want them to waste your time.
So if somebody just wants to email or call Steve, that's fine, just to ask. I don't think there will be a problem, but to Eric's point, yeah, that just to make sure.
I can certainly still email him.
Yeah.
I looked over those notes, and because we had not gone
Kirsten?
further with that in any way, and then nothing
Kirsten?
else happened, but I can email him.
I don't mean to get into your personal space, but seriously, that's what the borough manager should do, right? You shouldn't have to sweat those details.
Eric, we've talked a fair amount in the last few meetings about how we are a little tight for capability on the borough side. And that's partly why we decided we might need to look for a little bit more with this particular process. Reminder.
I feel bad.
I will do that.
You got all the IP on it. I get it. It makes sense, but I don't know, whatever. I'm done talking. Mute on, mute.
Last item on our agenda is about the vacant position open. And since Rich is here, I wanted to also make sure we all are aware. We are going to have Rich's position available as of April as well. Council has formed a new vacancy committee to keep track of all of the vacancies that we have, as we have quite a number of vacancies on our boards right now. And we have a number of people who are on boards serving terms that had already expired and they hadn't realized it. In fact, Colton's term had already expired. So he didn't actually formally step down. It had already expired. So our new council vacancy committee will be trying to seek people to fill our vacancies, but also trying to keep a little bit more on top of when terms are expiring and making sure that people are notified and aware and are able to apply again, or applications are advertised if we need to fill a new seat. Outgoing members, when your term does expire, you're more than welcome to apply again. There's no limit to that, but we do have a new policy in place now. So at the end of each term, the person will be notified a little bit in advance and they will have to reapply. So Rich, if you'd like to stay on the Planning Commission, we love to have you. You'll be notified in the next
Okay.
few weeks and you'll be prompted to reapply.
Okay.
And then of course, we also have Colton's vacant seat. So there's a new application process that's been put together. It's a one-page application. It will be available soon on the borough website if it's not yet. I'm not sure what the status is.
I can give you an update. We just had a meeting at 4 o'clock today. So
Okay.
fresh information. Colton is leading the vacancy committee. So it's the Vacancy Commissions Committee. And we have 21 openings on the website that you'll be able to see of people expiring either this year or have already expired on all the commissions. So his goal is to fill all of those openings. And we talked about the process which council approved at the last meeting. And there is an application like Kirsten had talked about. And we will be hopefully getting the applications and notifications, which will go out on Savvy Citizen and the website up this week and due by mid-March for all the vacancies that we have. And then we're gonna, make sure to advertise. We want people to recruit and make recommendations for all the positions. And to your point, on the Planning Commission, we do have the one vacancy, which was Colton's, and then we'll have Rich's vacancy. And if you scroll down, you also see the zoning hearing board, which is of course important. And there's only one person on it right now. So that's a really important one. No council member is allowed to be on this. So it can not be a council member, and there's some strict criteria around it. And we're gonna beef up all of the descriptions of the boards and commissions so that people know what the requirements are, who's allowed to be on, what the terms are, all of those things will be beefed up.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate hearing what you just said. But I'll tell you that this is, since I've been on council, one of the things that's like thoroughly upset me about Crafton and Crafton's the way we've always done it ways. At no point here, and this was under point 7 of my 9-point plan, roles and goals. Like, I understand that you're in a position where you demand the participation of your public, but you, the borough council and its employees, need to inspect what you expect. And what I mean by that is, at no point here in any of these things does it say, as an XYZ volunteer, you'll be participating in one meeting a month.
Yeah.
For 2 to 3 hours. You'll be the expectations of the public, because I tell you what, I see this with the organizations I work with, the school boards, PTAs, all of these sorts of things. You have to help people understand what they're getting involved in. And at no point does it share that.
Yeah, and great, because at 4 o'clock today, we put that together. So we're going to add descriptions of the committees, the terms, the commitment in hours and meeting times, and also the requirements by position. So for instance, like the shade tree, you have to be a shade tree committee, you have to be a tree tender. You know, we don't have that anywhere on here, to your point, Eric. So and people don't know how many meetings. Is it one meeting? Do you meet every week, every day? I wouldn't apply for them if I didn't know. So, and I applied for shade tree without knowing that. So great point. And I do HR for a living, so that's what it is, and that will be included. So Doug's putting all of those together, and we're going to review them tomorrow or sometime this week to make sure that they're included in the section that you see right here, so that people will know what they're applying for prior to that. And then after that, the process is, once we get the applications, we're going to have interviews. So we will have Zoom interviews with the chairperson and the members of the vacancy committee. And then the recommendations will be made to council, who then approves the folks to come into the commission. So it's a change from what we've done in the past, but I think, you know, to your point, Eric, it gets the right people that with the best talent on those commissions.
Because unless you talk to somebody in the know, you don't know what it is, and you don't want to get involved if you don't know what it is. And if you don't know who to talk to, then we just have the same little cabal running the show, and that's when people throw their daggers. So
That's exactly it. So even planning commission, you know, that description isn't great about what you guys are doing, and who would be a good. You guys all have this great experience. You know, can somebody in HR like me come onto this committee? Probably not. I would not be a great member. So that, you know, that's what we want to have happen, and find a spot that would be nice for me. So.
Fun fact, zoning hearing board only meets when needed.
Yes.
I don't know when their last meeting was. They only need.
I was on the zoning board for a while. Yes.
Yeah, they only meet if there's an issue. I think it's only whenever there's an issue, then they all get together. They also we have to hire an attorney that is not Steve Corbel, and no members of council can be on this, and it's a separate entity that approves any zoning variances. So very specific, very important, and we have one person on it.
Quasi judicial, they make
Yes.
decisions. Yeah, so that is the update, and great feedback from Eric about what we need to get into those. Sounds like some of that's already in there. Spread the word. If you have anyone you think would like to be on this committee, on our planning commission, or on any of our other boards. We have Colton. We have one vacancy from when Colton stepped down, and then, you know, Rich, you have the awareness now that you'll have to do the new application process come April. And we saw a draft of it at the last council meeting. It's pretty short. Not a hassle.
All right.
So if we go to citizen comments, we have no one on the line. Are there any comments from John or Jason before we close?
Nope.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, it's 8:03. Have a good evening, everybody.
Right. Good.
Thank you.